Welcome back. We're on to chapter 15 of Ratburger. I hope you're enjoying the story. Chapter 15 is called Ten-Tonne Truck. So this was goodbye. Zoe knew deep down she would never be able to keep Armitage for long. There were 100 reasons, but the most important one was he was a rat. Children don't have rats as pets. They have cats and dogs and hamsters and gerbils and guinea pigs and mice and rabbits and terrapins and tortoises. Posh ones even sometimes have ponies, but never rats. Rats live in sewers, not in little girls' bedrooms. Zoe trudged miserably out of Raj's shop. The newsagent may sometimes try and sell his customers a half-eaten chocolate bar or put a partially sucked toffee bonbon back in the sweet jar, but all the local kids knew that when it came to advice, he was the best. And that meant she had to say goodbye to Armitage. So Zoe took the long way back to her flats, through the park. She thought this would be the perfect place to set little Armitage free. There would be crusts of bread left out for the ducks for him to eat, a pond for him to drink from, and maybe even take the occasional bath in. And perhaps there was a squirrel or two who he could become friends with, or at least one day be on a nodding terms with. The little girl carried the little rat in her hand for the last part of the journey. As it was the middle of the afternoon, the park was all but empty, save for a few old ladies being walked by their dogs. Armitage wrapped his tail around her thumb. It was almost as if he sensed something was amiss, and he clung onto her little finger as tightly as he could. Trudging along as slowly as possible, Zoe eventually reached the middle of the park. She stopped a good distance from the yapping dogs and hissing swans and barking park keeper. Slowly she crouched down to the ground and unclosed her hand. Armitage didn't move. It was as if he didn't want to be parted from his new friend. He cuddled up to her hand, breaking Zoe's heart as he did. Zoe shook her hand a little, but this only made him grip tighter and his tail and his toes. Fighting back tears, she picked the rat up gently by the fur on the back of his neck and placed him carefully on the grass. Once again, Armitage didn't move. Instead, he just looked up at her longingly. Zoe knelt down and kissed him gently on his little pink nose. "Goodbye, little fellow," she whispered. "I'm going to miss you." A tear dropped from her eye. It landed on Armitage's whiskers, and his tiny pink tongue slipped out to catch it. The little rat tilted his little head to one side, as if trying to understand her, which just made it harder for Zoe. In fact, saying goodbye was so unbearably sad, she couldn't take it anymore. Zoe took a big deep breath and stood up, and promised herself she would not look back. That promise lasted only a dozen steps, as she couldn't help stealing a glance one last time to the spot where she had left him. To Zoe's surprise, Armitage was already gone. "Oh, he must have already scampered off to the safety of the bushes," she thought. She scoured the nearby grass for signs of movement, but it was tall and he was short, and apart from a light breeze blowing the tips, the grass didn't move. Zoe turned round and reluctantly headed home. Leaving the park, she crossed the road. For a moment it was free of the hum of cars, and in the silence Zoe thought she heard a tiny eek. She spun round, and in the middle of the road was Armitage. He had been following her all along. "Armitage!" she exclaimed excitedly. He didn't want to be free, he wanted to be with her. She was so glad. She had been imagining all kinds of awful scenarios from the moment she left him behind, like Armitage being gobbled up by a vicious swan, or wandering into the road and being hit by a 10-ton truck. At that moment, something came thundering along the road towards Armitage, who was still scampering slowly across to join Zoe. It was a 10-ton truck. Zoe stood frozen, watching the truck speeding closer and closer towards Armitage. The driver would never spot a baby rat in the road, and Armitage would be flattened and be nothing more than a splat on the tarmac. "No!" cried Zoe. But the truck thundered on. There was nothing she could do. Armitage looked in the direction of the truck and, realizing he was in trouble, started scampering back and forth across the road. The little rat was in a terrible panic, but if Zoe ran into the road, she would be flattened too. It was too late. The truck roared over him, and Zoe covered her eyes with her hands. Only when she could hear the truck's engine fading into the distance did Zoe dare open her eyes again. She looked for the splat on the road, but it wasn't there. What was there was Armitage. A little shaken perhaps, but alive. The lorry's giant tyres must have just missed him. Looking right and left and right again to check there were no cars, Zoe ran into the road and scooped him up. I'm not letting you go ever, said Zoe as she held him close. Armitage let out a little loving eek. Oh, whew, that was a close one. See you next time.